Hello everyone, welcome to the Logicworks summary of the reInvent 2018 releases. We're going to be talking about the trends and top announcements from this year's conference. My name is Phil Christensen. I'm the Senior Solutions Architect at Logicworks. This was a really great conference this year. There was a lot of amazing new services and real continued evolution of several other services. One of the quotes that Andy Jassy brought to the fore during his keynote was that we don't believe in just one tool to rule the world. We want you to use the right tool for the right job. Well, this was definitely the theme that we saw them going throughout the conference. There was a lot of expansion on existing services and a lot of new services introduced, and there was also a lot of focus on expanded security and workflow tools in the enterprise. So we've gone through and we selected some of the items that we think are most interesting and that are going to be most important moving forward this year. The first one we want to talk about is AWS Outposts. It's a new on-prem service where you can actually have a rack of AWS branded hardware that is installed standalone in your data center. So basically this gives you a way to run a portion of the AWS service space in your actual data center. Now there's a few different reasons you might want to use this. The particular way it was brought to the fore was in conjunction with VMware. Through the VMware and AWS partnership, now it's possible to run your VMware workloads on the AWS cloud. Well, now you have a third sort of option that you can run your VMware cloud workloads on an actual Outpost, which is a set of, again, these AWS branded servers that can be located in your actual data center. Additionally, this could be used as a standalone AWS service, or it can be used in conjunction, as I said, with VMware and the VMware cloud. So this is a really useful service to use as a transition point in a migration plan, or to run entire VMware workloads on AWS. AWS Control Tower is another really important service that we're going to see a lot of use for. AWS Landing Zone is a really increasingly popular solution for multi-account architectures. We found that many of our enterprise users are increasingly moving in this direction, both for workload separation, cost management, and security reasons. AWS Control Tower makes the deployment of such a landing zone a lot more straightforward, which means that there's a lot more partners who can help customers create these landing zone installations. The Control Tower primarily adds automation around the build-out process, but most importantly, perhaps, it adds a dashboard and a series of curated guardrails that give you both a single pane of glass to confirm that your landing zone is still configured properly, as well as a set of both active and passive guardrails that can ensure that there are no mistakes or changes made when modifying resources in the environment. As threats facing our infrastructure continue to proliferate, new and better tools are constantly needed to stay ahead of the curve. AWS has continued to evolve their own tool solution by introducing the AWS Security Hub, which continues their focus on integrating both native and third-party tooling into these all-in-one dashboards. These sort of provide a single pane of glass, much like the Control Tower service. The Security Hub provides a single place where you can check and confirm that compliance, security, and other standards are kept in sync and in place across all of your environments. It's an excellent single pane of glass for administrators working with AWS. There were a number of new announcements for AWS Lambda. We were very eager to finally see support for Ruby added to Lambda, as well as the introduction of support for custom runtimes. Basically, through the custom runtime feature, AWS was able to add partner-supported code for Erlang, PHP, COBOL, and others. And basically, this now means that any kind of language that you might want to run on Lambda, you can now actually create a custom runtime that will support that language. So now it's no longer necessary to wait for AWS to support the new latest, greatest language. You can actually do that yourself. And then finally, there was also some additions around the Lambda runtime itself, namely support for layers. Layers are a way to support recurring libraries and consistent dependencies across your Lambda stack. I believe that this is the result of this increasing movement towards serverless applications. We now have these suites of Lambda functions which may share particular requirements like libraries and so forth. A Lambda layer allows us to pre-create those different library sets so that our Lambdas only run with exactly what they need to run. It's going to greatly reduce deployment time and increase efficiency of making changes and updates and so forth. And then finally, they added support for adding Lambda directly to ALBs. And although on the surface this seems like a little bit of a strange particular use case, in fact it really fills in a gap that exists in API Gateway. So currently the only way to really provide a web accessible Lambda function is through the API Gateway. We now have the ability to make that at the local level rather than having to go through the whole the CloudFront distribution process with a API gateway. You can now have just a local ALB which will resolve to a particular Lambda function, much like the gateway would have. And then finally, actually a couple more things here. There was one of the things that we find ourselves using extensively, particularly in enterprise builds, are the AWS Transit VPC pattern. And the Transit VPC pattern consists of a couple of EC2-based VPN routers placed in public subnets, and then leveraging the managed VPN gateway to provide redundancy and connectivity between your Transit VPC and the various VPCs in your environment. While this worked perfectly well at the time, what AWS has done is expanded upon this concept by introducing the AWS Transit Gateway. And the Transit Gateway is sort of an all-in-one device that will allow us to integrate both VPC peering, VPNs, and the AWS Direct Connect services directly into a single transit gateway. So basically we have a single stop for any sort of transit needs within a complex routing infrastructure. So this is going to have a major impact on basically every enterprise build that we create. Finally, one of the sort of smaller items that were released but that really is going to have another big impact is the FSx for Windows File Server service. Basically this is a entirely cloud-native Windows File Server solution. Despite the focus on cloud-native services, we find that there's always a need for common patterns around shared storage. Until recently, the only native AWS service to fill this niche was the Elastic File System, or EFS. Now, EFS was great, but it unfortunately only provided this access to Linux machines, and they were required to use this to connect to a shared file system using NFS. Now with the FSx for Windows File Server service, we now can have similar capabilities for Windows services. So we have an Active Directory bound file system that can be shared across multiple AZs and ensure high availability access to your shared services. The last sort of series of improvements seem to all be around databases. In fact, there were way more than I really can outline here, but some of the major changes were the introduction of 2 new database types and then the expansion of Amazon Aurora into the global database format. This is a variation of a early Amazon Aurora release that allowed for multi-region read replicas. Now we have the ability to have multiple masters that are automatically delegated throughout those various regions. So once we declare an Aurora database as being a global database, behind the scenes AWS will ensure that the appropriate replicas are stood up in all of the regions in which we need to access it. But almost more interesting to me are the 2 new database types that have been introduced, both Amazon TimeStream and the Amazon Quantum Ledger database. Now TimeStream is a format of a database that we've seen several times before in the past. It's a time series database which to anyone who uses StatsD, Graphite, or InfluxDB should be familiar with this concept of whenever we have a need to store metrics over time, there's this requirement to have recent metrics that are very high resolution, And then as these metrics age, we want to preserve the information without maybe having such granular data stores. So, if this sounds like a familiar concept, this is exactly what CloudWatch metrics do. And so basically we now have the opportunity to create a set of a database data store that allows us to save the same kind of data over time that can also be sort of aged out as that data gets older. So it's really a very useful resource that had no managed equivalent currently in AWS. The other one that was added is part of the emerging blockchain interest that AWS has. And although I have a lot of interest in this myself, I'll be the first to say that we're not really exactly sure where the winds are blowing when it comes to blockchain. However, one thing that is needed to support any kind of blockchain service and can actually be useful in a number of other ways is a cryptographically secure ledger. So this ability to create a set of documents that are all interlinked, one after another, and that have a cryptographic control that ensures that each one of them is unmodifiable. So this is a really obscure but very essential aspect of blockchain technology, and is really useful for anyone who needs to maintain an ongoing ledger that cannot be modified. So it'll be really interesting to see what people do with these services as they mature and get more play. But these are the areas that we found most interesting services coming out during the reInvent 2018 conference. Just a little bit about Logicworks. We provide compliant cloud services for AWS. Cloud migration, operations, and optimization are ongoing services that we can provide to your organization. And we can also help you make sense of all of these kinds of services that come down anytime there's a new release within AWS. So we hope this has been helpful, and we hope to talk to you soon.